Welcome back to the Union. Before we begin, I'll just remind you that the Union's flagship garden party tickets go on sale tomorrow at 5 p.m. And there's still some tickets left for St. Joan, which is a production running this weekend in here. On to the debate. We've news today that another 50 fixed penalty notices have been issued for breach of COVID rules at Downing Street. It seems timely that the motion before the House this evening is that this House believes bad laws deserve to be broken. Tonight, the debate will run as normal, starting with a round of paper speakers in proposition, then opposition, followed by a round of floor speeches. Please keep these 1 to 2 minutes. We'll then hear another round of paper speakers, then floor speakers again, and then back for our closing paper speakers. Members can get involved in the debate through making a floor speech in proposition, opposition, or abstention. You can also get involved by interrupting a speaker at any time by saying, on that point or point of information. It is then up to the speaker whether they take your point. Interrupting a speaker during a debate is your right as a member, so please do. We are also joined by some non-members tonight, the Parkside School Debating Club, and they are also welcome to interrupt. Without further ado, let's begin the debate with our first proposition speaker, Professor Patrick Vernon, OBE. Professor Patrick is a social commentator, campaigner, and cultural historian. He helped to expose the Windrush scandal and has been extensively involved in tackling health inequalities for Black and racialised communities in Britain. Patrick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So, good evening, good evening, good evening. In terms of my team, the Dream Team, we are the Dream Team. We're going to convince you why it's good to break laws. As you know, from the time of Socrates, we've been having this big issue about laws, morality, what's good, what's bad. But I wanted to give you another proposition from another philosopher. Well, I wouldn't say philosopher, Judas Priest. Yes, Judas Priest. They had something about bad laws. I want to share the lyrics of an album they did back in 1980. Maybe some of you were around that time, or maybe not. It's called Break the Law. Listen attentively. There I was, completely wasted out of work and down. All inside was so frustrating, I drifted from town to town. I felt there was nobody that cared or lived or died. So I might as well begin and bring some action into my life. You know what it's called? Breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law. Check out it, it's on YouTube. So, breaking the law is actually quite good. It's good for your health and well-being. Just imagine if you were oppressed all the time by bad laws. Half of you wouldn't be here right now, maybe. That's why we need to break laws. My role model, Boris Johnson, sort of. He breaks the laws, and he gets away with it, doesn't he? He's still Prime Minister. He's paid his fine, and he's still breaking laws. So that's good. If it's good for the Prime Minister, it's good for all of us, shouldn't it? Surely. Would you agree with me? Would you agree with me? I can think of other people, contemporary and historically. But also, on a serious note, breaking laws is quite important because sometimes you have to break the law to make a point. Sometimes you have to break the law to expose structural racism, homophobia, sexism, ableism. Sometimes you have to break the law to make a difference, take a stand. Think of Martin Luther King. Just imagine if he didn't break any laws at all. Would there have been a civil rights movement in America? Would he have received the Nobel Peace Prize for his good deeds? The Nobel Peace Prize Committee recognized he broke the law, and he was still honored, wasn't he? Think what happened in South Africa. Nelson Mandela. How many decades did he spend on Robben Island? And he broke the law. And he broke the law because he refused to consent to the apartheid regime. Sign along dotted line here, and you'll be a free man. But he didn't do so. What would South Africa be like now if Nelson Mandela didn't break the law? That's why bad laws need to be got rid of. We've learnt it through the decades and centuries and thousands of years of civilization. That's why I'm a Trekkie, because you can break the laws and you can beam up anywhere. Bad laws is a stain on society. Bad laws degrade humanity. Bad laws exposes our fragility. Bad laws expose that how human can we be. That's why it's important that we can break laws. Only recently, 7 weeks ago, I was approached by a mother in Hackney, where I live. She came across what happened to a young girl called Child Q in Hackney, 15-year-old girl. The police strip searched her in a school without even informing her parents, not giving her the opportunity as a young girl about her circumstances. That was bad law. Absolutely bad law. But it's perceived as law. She's traumatized. The whole community is traumatized. And one of the consequences of bad laws, it does traumatize people. You speak to the Windrush scandal, speak to the victims or the survivors. The law was called hostile environment policy. That is the law. Is that good law or bad law? You tell me. As far as I'm concerned, it's bad law. But in the eyes of Theresa May, who was then Prime Minister, that was good law. And even today, Priti Patel, she sees it as good law. She says that we're righting the wrongs of the Windrush scandal. But she's going to spend 120 million quid in building refugee camps in Rwanda. Is that good or bad? That is against conventions, United Nations Convention, the whole range of conventions. Is that good or bad? I say to you, all of you, if there are bad laws in your university, in your colleges, stand up and rise and say to your bursar or to head of college, that is a bad law. I'm not going to follow your law. Bring on the fines. Mommy and daddy could pay for that. I don't care. Because it's good for my well-being and good for my health. Because I could be free as a bird. Because the bad laws don't touch me. Would you agree with me there? The bad laws won't touch me. So we are the dream team, and we are convinced that bad laws are not good for you. It undermines. People talk about rule of law, but whose rule, whose law? Yeah? Sometimes I think about that concept, the rule of law. How many lawyers are here in the house? Put your hand up, come on. How many lawyers in the house? Okay, how many people would like to be lawyers in the house? Okay, I was just checking out. Because you can leave right now. So the laws are there for a purpose. Laws are meant to protect us, safeguard us, keep us, protect our values and perspectives. And if the laws that hits us or come across us are seen as bad, we need to do something about that. So that's why I go back to my role model. Boris created these laws called the COVID rules, but he knew well that he was going to break the laws, or maybe not even going to break the laws. But for all of us, for millions of us, we follow those laws diligently. Some of you may have lost loved ones connected with COVID. Some of you were in social isolation because of COVID. Some people went on rallies saying, I want my freedom because of these COVID laws and rules and restrictions. But yet, we had no power or influence as individuals. Bad laws is a sign of democracy. Bad laws can undermine all of us. That's why we need to rise up, everyone, against these bad laws and create our own new laws. Laws that reflect us as individuals, reflect the intersectionality of Britain, that reflect the quality of life that we want to achieve. And then one day, we'll have good laws. And good laws do exist. We all know that. One of the first good laws when my parents came over to Britain was the 1965 Race Relations Act, outlawing discrimination in employment, in housing. We built on that. Quality legislation in terms of gender equality. We built on that. Quality legislation for the LGBT communities. We built on that. And the quality legislation for people with disabilities. These are all fantastic laws. So we should respect those laws, shouldn't we? Surely. So why do we have certain laws that we spend most time talking about? Why is it that 6 million people, on the recent legislation that was passed only about 2 weeks ago, 6 million people, some of you in this room who may have dual nationality, Priti Patel might say to you one day, leave this country. I don't need to give you a reason why. I don't like you. Go right now. Maybe I can take you to Rwanda. One-way ticket. So sometimes these laws, we have to stand up and rise. That's why democracy is important. That's why we need to challenge politicians. That's why we need to vote. That's why we need to remind them, don't take us for a ride. Because if you make bad laws, we're going to come and get you. Who's with me on this? We're going to get the politicians and the judges and the lawyers who are with me on this one. I'll raise there. So let's fight against the bad laws and have some good laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Moving on to our first opposition speaker, Angela Lynn Attic. Angela is a first-year senior status law student at Lucy Cavendish College. She won the right to speak through open audition. Angela, you have the ears of the House.
Today's motion is that bad laws deserve to be broken. But what is good and what is bad is a matter of relativity. This is the first fatal flaw of the proposition. Is it bad to steal someone's loaf of bread? Probably. Now, is it bad to steal someone's loaf of bread if they have an abundance of bread and your loved one is starving? The question becomes more difficult, doesn't it? Is it bad to lie? Probably. I'm sure some people here think it's sometimes okay to lie. Now, is it bad to lie in order to protect someone's feelings? The question again becomes much more difficult. In the words of Auguste Comte, tout est relatif et cela seul est absolu. Roughly translated, everything is relative and only that is absolute. By stipulating that bad laws deserve to be broken, it is suggested that we can all correctly judge what is good, what is bad, what is a good law, and what is a bad law. Would anyone here be okay with being judged in a court of law, not based on centuries of precedent, not based on carefully drafted legislation by an elected... Sorry?
On that point?
Yeah.
Aren't you yourself making value judgments that precedence is good and carefully reasoned is also good? Like you're yourself making value judgments and arguing against value judgments.
Thank you for your point, and that's a really good point. But what I'm saying is that it is not up to every individual to make value judgments, but if someone's going to make value judgments, I guess it should be a court of law based on centuries of precedent rather than a random individual's opinion. Sorry, I'm just going to continue. So, stipulating that bad laws deserve to be broken threatens the entirety of the legal system. It threatens the legitimacy of justice. It threatens the protection of good laws. It threatens the rule of law. This is not to say that legislation drafted by Parliament to kill all blue-eyed babies should be upheld and applauded in the name of parliamentary sovereignty. That's not what I'm saying. This is to say that bad laws should not be broken, but rather amended. A bad law that is broken is still good law. Good law in a jurisprudential sense, in the sense that it is still valid. It still holds legal weight. It has not yet been overturned. Breaking a law doesn't change that fact. Yes?
You're saying on the procedural aspect, the law passed by Parliament based on sovereignty is But substantive speaking, as you can see from the Constitution, the concept rule, and then the constitution basis of the British system, how do you say substantively they are ruleful? Procedurally, yes, but substantively speaking, how do you argue that?
How do I argue that what Parliament legislates is substantively good law?
Yeah, for example, like you are law student, we do judicial reviews, the ground for judicial reviews. Then the substantive speaking, the action is a ground for judicial reviews.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that not every law is going to be objectively or obviously good. And that's why there are procedures in place in order to review laws and amend them. I'm saying that the way to do it is not through breaking a law. Gibran Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese writer, in his famous book, The Prophet, wrote on laws. Then a lawyer said, "But what of laws, master?" And he answered, "You delight in laying down laws, yet you delight more in breaking them. Like children playing by the ocean who build sand towers with constancy and then destroy them with laughter. But while you build your sand towers, the ocean brings more sand to the shore. And when you destroy them, the ocean laughs with you. Verily, the ocean laughs always with the innocent." One of his messages was that we need not fear judgment of human laws if we do no harm. But that is a different question entirely. The message that I would like to convey to you tonight is that, like children building sandcastles and breaking them, people can break laws on a whim. And that laws made by people are changeable. Therefore, is it not greater, is it not more courageous to change an unjust law rather than simply break it? In Les Misérables, in a conversation between Jean Valjean and Javert, a police inspector, Jean Valjean says, "I stole a loaf of bread. My sister's child was close to death and we were starving." Javert replied, "And you will starve again unless you learn the meaning of the law." Of course, in this scenario, it does seem like Javert was harsh, and it maybe shouldn't be a crime to steal a loaf of bread under these circumstances. Suggesting that laws should be broken doesn't mean that no one will ever starve again. It simply means that the legal system which protects us, our bread, and more importantly, our loved ones, will be shattered. Is it not better to strive for a world where no one needs to steal bread because no one is starving, rather than to simply say, let's just break the law? Stipulating that bad laws deserve to be broken neglects the importance of the rule of law. In the words of Eisenhower, the clearest way to show what the rule of law means to us in everyday life is to recall what has happened when there is no rule of law. Please allow me to give you a vivid illustration of what happens. This example is personal and a painful account of what happens to a society deprived of the rule of law. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a combustible chemical compound, are stored unsafely in a port warehouse for almost 6 years. Senior officials are aware of the material's existence and the danger that it poses, but they do not secure, remove, or destroy it. They do not warn anyone about it. They remain silent. The Beirut port explosion is what happens when there's no rule of law. One of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, damaging over half of Beirut city. A fire starts and the ammonium nitrate explodes. How the fire started, that's a question for another day. Regardless of the answer to that question, the reality still remains the same. 218 people are killed, 7,000 are injured, and 300,000 are left without a home. These people are mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, sisters, brothers, friends, partners, soulmates. The explosion affected schools, hospitals, a tragedy killing nationals from all around the world. Almost 2 years later, no one is held accountable. Investigations are tampered with. Politicians still find their way around justice and refuse to allow for an international tribunal to be formed. Under domestic law, the explosion could lead to a conviction of a crime of homicide. It also constitutes a violation of a right to life under international human rights law. Yes, was it? Sorry? Yeah. No more points? Okay, sorry, thank you. So I'm just going to conclude my speech. This is what happens in the absence of the rule of law. This is what might happen if we begin to make exceptions and say that sometimes it's okay to break the law. This is what is at stake. Bad laws don't deserve to be broken. The rule of law is too precious. Bad laws must be amended, and we, as citizens, have the power to ensure their amendment. More importantly, we have a duty to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. We'll now do a round of floor speeches. These will be 1 to 2 minutes, and please say your name and college or school before you go. In proposition, would anyone like to speak?
I don't know if it is. Oh, sorry, apologies. My name is Alex Breckenridge. I'm a lawyer at Lucy Cavendish, also senior status. Firstly, I hope you all keep the same energy in terms of POIs during the male speakers' speeches going forwards, as you did to Angela. But secondly, we've heard tonight about the bravery of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela and how in breaking the law, he secured a future of democracy for South Africa, and that's true. But what we haven't heard is that Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela and his comrades, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and more people would all have been executed at the Rivonia trial in 1963 had it not been for the intervention of activist lawyers like Arthur Chaskelson, like Bram Fisher, and more like Sir Sidney Kentridge, who used the basic arguments of legality and the basic principles of the common law, like habeas corpus, to guard against the arbitrariness of the apartheid state. And were it not for the basic principles of the rule of law, those struggle heroes would have been executed summarily in the 1960s. And for those reasons, the law ought to be protected. Even when it's bad, it guards against arbitrariness and violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as an opposition speech. So we'll do another one in proposition, if anyone would like to speak. We'll go over here, very keen hand. Name and college, please.
Max Ghosh, Trinity Hall. Look, there's only been one speech, but I'm not convinced by the opposition yet, and I'm worried about the potential straw man in this debate, both here and surrounding the motion generally. I think it's important to state for those leaning towards the opposition that breaking bad laws doesn't necessarily mean sort of violent terrorist action. Breaking bad laws doesn't necessarily mean the spilling of bloods in the streets. And also, no, I'm literally supported by the former Conservative Justice Minister here, so if you're not taking my word, take his. In fact, breaking bad laws is often the best with non-violent direct action. Breaking bad laws is when sort of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the SCLC and the NAACP and others broke laws, as my first proposition speaker said, written by segregationists in Southern America. They went down to the South and broke bad laws for the right to vote. Mahatma Gandhi broke bad laws non-violently against colonialists that gave my father's family freedom. Breaking bad laws is when in a few months' time, Roe versus Wade is overturned and millions of women in America are going to be forced to break bad laws to have the rights of their own bodies. Go on.
Do you think that laws made by authoritarian regimes or apartheid states are valid laws at all?
No, which is why I'm speaking in proposition saying we should break them. Well, while I don't support sort of violent terrorist action to break bad laws, we need to break that bad laws, as my first proposition speaker said, with non-violent direct action, because otherwise we have no justice for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And would anyone like to speak in abstention of the motion?
Hi, I'm Rose. I am a first-year law student at Pembroke, and I have a constitutional law SUPO tomorrow, and my supervisor is going to kill me for saying I don't think the rule of law is the gist of this debate. But when I hear about bad laws, the first thing that comes to my mind is that in this country, it is not an offence to tell a woman that you have had a vasectomy, proceed to have sex with her on that basis. It's not illegal, it won't be rape. I therefore think the law on rape is incredibly deficient and an awful law. Us being the union, we've taken a very libertarian approach to this debate and said a bad law is something that prohibits us from doing something we should be able to do. But there's also a whole host of bad laws that are deficient and underprotective. Breaking those laws won't remedy them. Breaking those laws will do nothing. That's why I think we should abstain from the motion and realise that a lot of laws don't need to be broken. They need to be improved and strengthened for the sake of protecting society, protecting minorities, and protecting global interests.
Thank you so much. We'll now move back to our paper speakers to hear from our second proposition speaker, Anthony Brown. Anthony is the co-founder of Windrush Defenders Legal, advocating to repair the damage done to African and Caribbean communities by systemic injustices and immigration policy. He is also a member of the Home Office's Windrush Stakeholder Advisory Group. Andrew, the floor is yours. Anthony, sorry.
Thank you. So, I was born in Jamaica in 1960, a citizen of the United Kingdom and Colonies. That came from a law that was made by the British government that people who lived in the colonies and in the UK were citizens, and they had the right to come and go. My father came here in 1960, just after I was born, and he came on a scholarship to be a civil engineer and to help rebuild the country. My family was brought here in 67 by my dad. My mum and 4 siblings came over, and myself, and we settled and grew up here. So I want to tell you that I'm a lawbreaker, and I want to show you from my story that you don't really have to do very much to break the law. Now, in 67, I came to school. I grew up here. But then in 73, my dad took me back to Jamaica with another brother. After 4 years of pining, I wanted to come back home because I saw this as home, because coming here as a young child, you develop affinities. But the government had given Jamaica independence. And in 1962, the Jamaica Independence Act was passed, which took away my dad's citizenship of the United Kingdom and Colonies. Nobody told him. It also affected me. Nobody told me. Everybody in Jamaica thought this was a great law, but the people who had come here, many of them from the 40s, fought in the war, came on the Empire Windrush and lived here, had left Jamaica, had nothing to do with Jamaica. That Independence Act impacted negatively on them. So for me, a bad law is where you have a law that impacts on a group negatively and unjustly. Now, we talk about the Windrush generation, but who are the Windrush generation? Well, they are people who the government says started coming on the Empire Windrush between 1948 and 1973. Now, that's part of the story. But where do African people come from? Well, people usually say Africa. But these people were coming from the Caribbean. How did Jamaica become part of the British Empire? Well, we have to go back to Oliver Cromwell. And after the Civil War, the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell built up the navy and sent them off to Jamaica, to the Caribbean in 1655 to take a piece of the Spanish and Portuguese Empire. Where did they get that empire from? They got it from a law. They got it from a decree issued by Pope Nicholas V that said that the King of Portugal, Afonso V, had a right to attack Saracens, Muslims, and pagans, Africans, and to keep them in perpetual slavery. That law benefited a lot of European countries, but it negatively and unjustly impacted on Africans. Oliver Cromwell saw that these other European countries were building up their empires, tried to attack Hispaniola, failed, and then took Jamaica instead, and brought Africans from Africa to Jamaica and enslaved them to make wealth for the British Empire. Now, roll on another 300 years, and you find that the people in the Caribbean have fought in a number of wars for Britain, have served Britain, and find themselves then as citizens, and then when their citizenship is taken away, they are then facing immigration law, because then Britain passed the 1971 Immigration Act, which said if you have a father and a grandfather that's born in the UK, then you can be British. But many of the Jamaicans didn't, and they had started out as citizens. But everybody thought the Immigration Act was great, but it negatively impacted on another group of people. And for me, when I came back here, I was breaking the law, and I didn't know. So I was a lawbreaker, and I wanted to go to university to study law, and the university was telling, the colleges were telling me I was being treated as an overseas student, and I didn't know why. They said, you need to write to the Home Office. So I wrote to the Home Office, and they said, yep, you're an illegal immigrant. You need to report to Manchester Airport to be deported. So, of course, I was shocked. I was a lawbreaker for just living. So I'd started off as a citizen, became an immigrant, and without doing very much. So for me, bad laws do need to be broken. When we were enslaved in the Caribbean, we had Sam Sharp in Jamaica that led a rebellion in 1831. And after that rebellion, Britain passed the Emancipation Act, which gave Africans human rights, or to be treated as humans rather than as property. So that was a bad law that negatively impacted on people, but then through rebellion and war was changed. Toussaint Louverture in Haiti also fought against the French, the British, the Spanish. He organized an army and defeated them all, and in 1803 declared Haiti free of slavery. So that was a law that again impacted negatively on people, that was broken by revolution and violence. Yes?
Do you not think you're cherry-picking cases? Like, a lot of people in prison you wouldn't be bringing up here as, oh, they thought the law was bad and they broke it, and now let's talk about that.
Not cherry-picking cases, because I gave the definition that a bad law was a law that impacted negatively on a group of people unjustly. People who are in prison justly because they've committed a crime. Now, people who are enslaved are being treated unjustly. So I would say they have every right to fight against those bad laws. Yes?
You just said that it's okay to treat people with just they committed a crime. Isn't the irony of the situation that many people you're talking about had also committed crimes under the law? So how do you differentiate between people who commit good crimes and bad crimes? It seems to be all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, the key word there is justly. So it depends on the conscience of the person, and it depends on the cause. So if a person feels like I felt that I was treated unjustly, then I have a right to take action against that. If I go to court, like, for example, what happened with Colson, the jury might find that my actions were justified and not convict me. So it's always okay to challenge the law, yes.
So what you're saying is that, like, let's say, so you're saying that someone who thinks that they're doing right can break a law? Right?
Yes.
Okay, so what happens if I'm mentally unwell and I think it's okay to kill people? Is that okay? But I'm still breaking, in my eyes, a bad law? Mm-hmm.
Well, the courts have a way of dealing with that. So they have an act that will determine whether or not you are compos mentis or you are mentally ill, and they will put you in a mental institution if you are mentally ill. So the law, assesses the person who's taking the action and deals with them accordingly. So, coming back to my situation, with regards to the laws at the moment in this country, you've got one section of the population, the Windrush generation, who are British citizens, who have been treated unjustly because because society changes over the years, and the laws change. The politicians have the job of managing the situation and making sure they put provisions in place to tackle this. But this hasn't happened with the Windrush generation. Sorry? PO? Oh, yes. Okay. So, in conclusion, I want to propose a law that breaks other laws. So, I want to propose a Windrush Act that amends the British Nationality Act, because what's happening there is that people who are British, the Windrush generation, the government says they're British in all but legal status, but because of the changes to the British Nationality Act, so in 1988, the Section 7 that allowed people from Commonwealth countries to register as British citizens if they were living here, was repealed. And that's created a problem because now there's only naturalization, and there are various criteria that they have to meet and jump through various hoops. If they've been out of the country, that's a problem. If they've not been living here for 5 years, that's a problem. If they've had a criminal record when they were younger, that's a problem. And yet, that doesn't apply to other people, British people, their neighbours. So that becomes a bad law for them. And so in order for our society to function, politicians need to look again at that situation and come up with policies and proposals or new laws that's going to address that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Moving on to our second opposition speaker, we have Lord Edward Folkes. Lord Folkes is a barrister and member of the House of Lords. Formerly a Conservative peer, he has served as Minister of State for Criminal Justice and Legal Policy. He became chairman of the Independent Press Standards Organisation and led the independent review of the administrative law. Lord Edward, the floor is yours.
Very much.
It's very nice to be here. I must say they are letting people into Cambridge very young nowadays. Now, most of you are young and full of revolutionary fervor, and I'm sure you want to change the law in a number of ways. Let's legalize cannabis. Let's allow people who want to die, let's assist them if they really want to die and they can't do it themselves. Let's not change anything to do with abortion like the Supreme Court of the United States looks like it's going to do. There are lots of things I don't like. There are lots of laws you don't like. But it seemed to me the last speaker, elegant though he was in expressing his views, was actually saying, yes, change the law, but do it through the traditional routes of amending legislation. Absolutely right. Of course, there are other ways of influencing the law. Protesting, writing to your MP, old-fashioned thing. Yes.
With new bills that limit the right to protest, then focusing itself would be breaking a bad law.
Well, a fair point. You're not supposed to glue yourself to the highway to prevent ambulances getting to the hospital, and you're not supposed to deafen every single person when you're making your protest. But the right to protest is a fundamental part of our Constitution, and it continues to exist, and so it should. And, of course, you can harangue people on social media, and you can lobby them. You can even become a member of Parliament, of course. That can simply change things.
But if you are not a citizen, as the article
Well, most people can't become members of Parliament even though they like to, but they will use legitimate ways of placing pressure or encouraging people through lobby groups, through contacting their members of Parliament, or even members of the House of Lords in order to try and change the law. I want to mention sausages. It's often said that even if you like sausages, you shouldn't really go and look at how they are being made. Now, it could be said as much the same about making laws, but it's not always the case. For example, there was much criticism of judicial review, as some of you may know. So Sir Robert Buckland, as the Lord Chancellor, decided it was a good idea to set up a group of people to look at the law, and he invited me to chair it. We produced a report, it was debated, it went to various committees. A bill was then produced, drafted in a way that reflected our recommendations. It was debated in Parliament in both houses. It was looked at various committees. And 2 weeks ago, it became law. Isn't that a better way of changing the law than simply saying, I don't like it, I'm going to march down the streets and change it? And
What are people supposed to do who are suffering from bad laws in the year that it takes for laws to be reformed? They can bring people to starve, they can't steal the bread, for example, that was used earlier.
the answer is that Parliament is perfectly capable of passing emergency legislation. I have particular experience of that. For example, I was trying to get the law changed in relation to do something more about the Russians who were exploiting our property market in a way that was entirely inappropriate. Parliament did not respond to my entreaties on various amendments. However, after the invasion of Ukraine, within about 2 weeks, there was an emergency economic crimes bill that was passed. Parliament can act quickly if it's necessary.
On that point, but only because of the war.
I'm sorry?
I mean, the war certainly exacerbated it.
The war was that suddenly we didn't like the Russians, and we were prepared to wake up to the fact that we've been turning a blind eye to the fact that they were exploiting our society.
Right, but do you need a war every time?
No, you shouldn't need a war. You should be, I absolutely agree with you, you should be recognizing it. The process is imperfect. But there are plenty of examples, of course, of laws that might have been broken, encouraged to be broken in a way that we might approve of. But that isn't good enough to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what really was suggested by the first speaker. Simply anarchy. You ignore the law altogether and you do what you want to do. One's own perception of what is good law is one's own perception. Of course, it's judges who decide the law, not just and change the law, not just Parliament. I found some judges infuriating, biased, prejudiced, unfair, and others absolutely brilliant and entirely in touch with the zeitgeist, depending on whether they find in favor of my clients. But the rule of law does matter. Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch all that. But of course, there are differences with different laws and different responses are appropriate. I was talking about judges and what we ask judges to do. We must accept what they do. And the prorogation case is a particularly good example of where the rule of law worked. Boris Johnson, placed in a dilemma, could not get his main policy through Parliament, stymied by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, disagreement in his own party, decides to prorogue Parliament unconventionally for a longer period. There is a challenge to what he's done in the courts. The Divisional Court decides that, although they may not approve of what he has done, it is nevertheless a matter of politics rather than law. The Supreme Court magnificently decides to the contrary. All 12 of them, I'm sure you remember the vision of the President of the Supreme Court delivering this judgment. And what happened? Boris Johnson obeyed. Parliament was reassembled. We solved a constitutional problem, in my view unsatisfactorily, but that doesn't alter the fact that it was the process that was working well. We didn't solve it by tanks. We didn't solve it by people disobeying the law. We used the mechanism to get to the result. That's why it works. We do ask judges to do some pretty odd things, it's true. Decide, for example, what's obscene. Now, this doesn't happen very much nowadays, but when I was growing up, there was a great row about whether or not young people could be shocked and outraged by pornography. And now you can get it at the touch of a mouse. Then, of course, everything at all unsuitable was at a higher shelf, so small boys like me couldn't reach it. And we decided it was appropriate for judges to decide these things. Fortunately, we don't. Judges had to decide what was obscene. But we had to accept their verdicts, just as we accepted the verdict of the jury in the Lady Chatterley's lover case. One of the senior judges in the United States apparently was given the task of deciding what was obscene or not. He had to look at various items which were potentially obscene and decide on the basis of whether he was aroused by what he saw. As he got older, more and more items seemed to pass the list. So these are absurd laws, and we must accept the fact that law will sometimes be ridiculous. But do we want anarchy? I remember one of the men on the same staircase as me at the other university was an anarchist. We felt very strongly about the need to have representation on the governing body in our college. And the anarchist and I were selected to sit on the incredibly tedious meetings that took place in the college. The anarchist always seemed to be a rather strange anarchist. His room was very, very tidy. And he also became rather obsessed by how often the lawn in the front quad was mown. But ultimately he said, I don't want any laws because I want to do precisely what I want. And isn't that really what this proposal comes to? We decide what the law is, we do what we want. I think we need a bit of modesty, a bit of humility. We have to accept that the rule of law must accommodate and mediate between all our different views. If we don't have the rule of law, we have anarchy, we have Putin, who should be before the International Criminal Court, yes? Apologies. Otherwise, we have autocrats, dictators, doing what they want. We want the rule of law for all its imperfections. This motion should be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lord Folkes. We'll now do another round of floor speeches. Would anyone like to speak in proposition?
Hi, my name is Asosa Okoje, Asosa Kikuchuku Okoje, and I go to Queen's College. I'm just going to read something. So for some of us, breaking bad laws is actually an act of survival, and I feel like that's something that's kind of been missed a lot in the debate tonight. So let's look at what breaking bad laws actually is. Breaking bad laws was at a time sleeping with a person that you loved or just fancied. Breaking a bad law was escaping slavery. Breaking a bad law was harboring your Jewish neighbor in Nazi Germany. I think what we're missing and what the other side is trying to make us forget by lulling us with romantic notions of the stability and the protection and the so-called protection of the rule of law is that for so many people, breaking a bad law is an act of survival. Breaking a bad law is as simple as existing for a biracial person in apartheid South Africa. To say bad laws shouldn't be broken is for many a death sentence. And I think it's frankly disgusting that so many of you are willing to hand down a death sentence to so many to protect your precious rule of law. Then let's address the argument that bad laws should be changed. Okay, when they are changed, apartheid in South Africa was abolished, so was slavery, the Third Reich in Germany was vanquished. These bad laws that were changed, did you go back and pay reparations to those you harmed under these bad laws? Bad laws that built your society, slavery which built this society, this economy. Did you go back and address that harm? In this country, the answer is no. You can't even return the goods that your bad laws let you loot. So I'm sorry, but I will be breaking bad laws as an act of survival, as an act of self-care. When this government bans protests, I will be breaking that bad law because I'm not holding out for this country to suddenly find a morality that it has never really possessed. That's me.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to speak in opposition?
Does this work?
Yes.
Okay, so I kind of want to
Name
address...
and college, please.
Oh yeah, I'm Luke, I'm a historian at Johns. And I kind of want to address the assumption that's been going on in proposition, which is that those breaking bad laws are progressive. And I think for a lot of bad laws right now, this isn't the case. I'm not sure why we assume that those breaking bad laws are the enlightened members of the Cambridge Union, rather than, say, the Ku Klux Klan. Why would those breaking bad laws not be those who say go outside abortion clinics and go and intimidate women who want to enter? Why would it not be those employers who want to racially discriminate, no thank you, who want to racially discriminate against their employees? These are the function of the laws in our modern society. They are protecting as much as they are harmful. No thank you. And this leads to my second point, which is we need to differentiate where these laws are actually made, because nearly all the examples of bad laws we've had so far, colonialism, slavery, apartheid South Africa, are not functioning democratic states. So yes, we may say that in states where you do not elect a representative, where you are generally not engaging in government, as Martin Luther King, as Nelson Mandela were not, in these states, the laws are illegitimate because you do not have a hand in making them. But what we actually need from proposition are them to give examples of bad laws that are made in modern, functioning liberal democracies where people do have a hand in creating their laws, and where, as a rule, most of these laws do not evince the kind of harms and matters of survival that we've heard so powerfully within this debate. Is this realistic scenario that proposition needs to engage with?
Finally, would anyone like to speak in abstention of the motion?
Please go easy on me. Point of information, I might cry. So everyone's talking about really, and my name's Katie and I go to Fitzwilliam College. I do PBS with criminology, and criminology is hard. So everyone's talking about really serious laws. I'm nervous, can you tell? Over there you were talking about what in criminology referred to as strain theory, which is when we commit crimes because we're poor and we need to steal things to get by and the system isn't supporting people. But I'm going to talk about really stupid laws. Not stupid laws, but like, don't steal. It's been a law for a long time, and a thong from Victoria's Secret costs £7. That's a lot of money, and I'm promoting try before you buy. Like, you should be able to nick one, try it, and then decide whether you want to spend that much money on a pair of knickers, if they're going to spend that much money. Food, if you're buying fruit, why not nick a grape? It's illegal, but it's not that bad. And also in criminology, we look at rational action theory, which is the fact that when someone commits a crime, they have to decide whether or not they're going to commit a crime. And a lot of people, that just does not occur to them. To conclude, law is really broad. They're really serious laws that we need to fight for rights. But also, there's a lot of things that just don't matter that much. Like, we can't all steal all the underwear from Victoria's Secret. But for the people that do realise that they can, it's not that deep. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to our final paper speakers. On the proposition, we have Sir Robert Buckland, QC. Sir Robert is the MP for South Swindon and has served as Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. He has also been Solicitor General and Minister for Prisons. As a barrister before entering politics, he specialised in criminal law. Robert, the floor is yours.
And it's a pleasure to be back here at the Cambridge Union tonight. I think we have been informed, particularly by the younger members of the audience. I think we were getting a bit of a Marxist dialectic down here on the right, which is always refreshing. But what I've heard this evening in summary is a rather eloquent and well-informed debate. It's great listening to criminologists, students. You wait until you actually represent the people you're talking about. And you'll suddenly realise that every case throws up a whole host of new challenges, and no two people are the same when it comes to the criminal justice system. And I've had the privilege of addressing many hundreds of juries across our jurisdiction in my years prior to entry to Parliament. I think the Cambridge Union is always a pretty tough audience, but tonight, let me make a final impassioned plea to you all to accept the force of the case that has been set out so eloquently, first of all, by our proposer, Patrick, and then by Anthony, somebody who isn't a criminal, isn't somebody who's done anything wrong. He's just made the mistake of being alive. And that was his powerful argument. That is an example of where a failure by the law to keep pace with morality, the morals of our time, means that we have victims like him and many others. And here's the thing. A former Lord Chancellor speaks. The rule of law is a political construct. It's not the law itself. And that is a very important way of deconstructing some of the rather casual assumptions that are made about the role of law in our society. Because if the rule of law itself is elevated to be law, you're very quickly in a situation where the rule of law becomes the rule of lawyers. And the rule of lawyers isn't a very good place to be, because who elected them? And fundamentally, our case is this, that any law that is not based upon a moral or a democratic process can't be a good one. If you go to the Pawiak prison in Warsaw and look at the paraphernalia of the Nazi occupation of Poland in 1939-40, you'll see law, you'll see due process, you'll see warrantry, you'll see authorization, you'll see the stamp on the official document. But what you don't see is legitimacy. What you don't see is due process. What you don't see is fair outcome. And of course, and I'll give way in a moment, but I'll just develop this point. By the time you get to 1944, that pretense is gone. And the arbitrary reality of a state like the Nazi regime is thrown into the open. And this is the problem. When the law is used as a veneer for authoritarianism, it is bad law. And it is happening now. It's happening in Hong Kong, folks. And that is why the British judges in Hong Kong have now, with the serving judges, have withdrawn from the Court of Final Appeal, because they cannot, in all conscience, offer a veneer of democracy and legitimacy to a regime that is going bad. And I'll take the intervention.
If democracy and democratic assent is what makes a law valid and legitimate, if we have a law such as property theft and damage is bad, and then a counteracting case such as I want to protest a massive oil company by damaging their property, how do you stand when it comes to the intersection between those two things?
Well, here's the tension in a democratic society, and there are people who will support the motion tonight who might take a different view of me about the law of protest. The simple truth is that we are free to break the law in a democratic society, but we then take the consequences. It is consequences that are really important here. So in the example of the theft of a loaf of bread from somebody in genuine need, that isn't about law, that's about justice and about mitigation and about that person being able to explain to the authority that they did it in extreme need, and that therefore, although they've broken the law, they should not be punished in a way that will be disproportionate and unfair and make their situation worse. And you know that happens every day, particularly in the magistrates' courts and crown courts around our country, because we have dedicated barristers and solicitors who make that case. Don't be fooled by going down that line of argument. And I'll give way to you, young man. Yes. Fundamental point about why it is actually pretty good sense to have a law of theft in this country. I am not advocating, and by the way, our proposer was not advocating anarchy. There's been a mischaracterization, I'm afraid, dare I say, by my good friend, the Noble Lord Folkes, about our case. We're not all standing here as blood-soaked anarchists, and the point, I think, was made in the hall that to break a law isn't necessarily an act of terrorism. Sometimes, as has been said, it's an act of survival. And that, I think, is the point that I really want you to focus on. Now, eloquently, an intervention was made about the Rivonia trial in South Africa, and I had the honour of knowing some of the lawyers involved with that case. Lord Joffe, Joe Joffe, was a junior barrister representing one of the alleged co-conspirators with Madiba on that occasion. But I can tell you, although due process did prevail in the end, the lawyers involved in that case were not in a position where they were at all times able to represent their clients without fear or favour. It was a pretty dangerous experience for them all, a frightening and quite intimidating experience, because there you had a society that was using the trappings of law and legitimacy, but which fundamentally represented something pretty evil and pretty wrong. And South Africa is by no means the only example. And I'll give way to the lady.
Who determines justice? What is just and what is unjust?
Yeah.
The line of the law and justice is two dichotomized concepts, but if the law is democratically reached and justice, we're not going to let each individual decide what is just, otherwise we would be in the anarchy.
Yeah. Well, look, that's the fundamental challenge to our side. What I'm trying to do is provide an objective criterion by which we can measure what is bad. And I think in the main, there are exceptions. I'll give you an example now. Undemocratic dictatorships produce really bad laws. You know, there's the enabling laws of Nazi Germany, the book burning, the segregated marriages. All those things were laws. They were passed by a process, but it's not one that we would recognise as producing anything good. Now, Lord Folkes talked about assisted dying. Now, we've all got different views about that, and we're not here to debate that tonight. But here's an example in a democratic society where the law is broken every year. And there are many, many people who end up breaking the law and helping their loved one end their life, and they face the dilemma of potentially being prosecuted. So we've come up with a compromise, which is that the guidelines given by the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, will look at the facts of each case very carefully and very often decide not to prosecute. Now, that is an undeniable fact, whatever one's views about assisted suicide, of a law being broken and the consequences not being disproportionate to the people responsible. So already in our own society, in our own world here today in the United Kingdom, we have that rather inelegant compromise. I think it's inelegant, but I think it works and it is something that is fair. And that's why I draw the distinction. Let me give you an example about how times change. In the court of Queen Elizabeth I, the sumptuary laws of 1562 prohibited anyone, and I quote, from appearing at the royal court wearing shirts with outrageous double ruffs. Or how about this, a hose of monstrous and outrageous greatness? Well, you'll be glad to know that James I, that great Democrat, repealed the law in his reign. The irony of the progenitor of the divine right of kings keeping up with appearances is not lost on us. But that rather trivial example can be repeated time and time again. Segregation, Jim Crow, apartheid, all these were laws, but their morality, always in question, ran out long before they were repealed. And that is why the direct action that was taken by Dr. King and many others in the United States has had to be repeated across the world, because law did not keep up with the morality of the times. And when the law does not do that, the law, Madam President, is an ass. And if anybody really believes in justice and the rule of law, you will support the motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Robert. Moving on to our final speaker of the night, John T. Yin. John T. is a second-year undergraduate law student at Downing College and co-founder of the Cambridge University Mock Trial Society. He won the right to speak through open audition. John T., the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. It's all too simple to dismiss bad law as only the construct fashioned by those with power to subjugate those without. Often, unfortunately, that is true. To see ignoring them as a way of reasserting individuality against authority, also sometimes true. But to question, should we disobey bad laws, we need to first ask, what's bad law? In fact, we first need to ask, what is law? Cicero once said that law is the highest reason implanted in nature. If law is the highest reason, bad law is not that without reason or legitimacy. Bad law is that which, though it fulfills these criterion, does not pursue a goal in a way we consider to be correct. Thus, the proposition's twofold distinction of good law and bad law is overly simplistic. It does not separate what is subjectively incorrect from what is objectively inexcusable. And tonight we've heard many examples of what has been objectively inexcusable. So I propose a threefold categorization. We have law that's good, we have law that's bad, and we have that which is not law. That is what deserves to be ignored. Tonight, I propose to highlight to all of you that a care to the wind declaration that bad laws deserve to be broken is fundamentally flawed. So first, that the individual, I propose, is not well placed to determine when laws are bad. Our local election just a week ago proved that there are quite a lot of wide-ranging views that we have across the country. 66 councils had no majority, and for context, that's just 10 less than Labour and nearly double the number won by the Conservatives outright. That's quite a lot of disagreement. Such divisions stem from the fact that each and every one of us naturally has different views on what constitutes good law and bad law. Now, I think in this chamber we can probably all agree on some things that are good and some things that are bad. I think we probably all agree that generally murder is bad, and I think we probably all agree that education is good, considering that we're in this chamber. Perhaps, though, I think we'd be a little bit more troubled in finding some agreement on whether we should repeal the Human Rights Act. I know I certainly don't agree with one of the proposition speakers on that one. If a global debate were held tonight, for example, on the right to bear arms, perhaps, you'd probably get more opinions about the issue than there are people, and I don't think you get a good idea of what a good law would make. And yet, the staunch NRA member has to accept when they come to the UK, they cannot carry their gun. They may think the law is bad, and I may think the law is good. Either way, we both have to follow it. Unfortunately, whilst it may be good for the individual sometimes to break what we perceive to be a bad law, whilst it may be good that one can block a road sometimes in a protest, beware the person with that justification whose goals you don't support. It is good perhaps when a law one time is broken by someone who is supporting democracy. Perhaps not so when the racist or the misogynist or the homophobe use that same justification. Beware a society that's never certain which laws it will deem bad, where we don't know who will break which law exists. Because without certainty, you get chaos. And quite like chaos, gravity too will only need a little push to lead to worse. So instead, what we should be condemning is not bad law, it is what is not law at all. Now, Sir Leslie Stephen once proposed, and Angelus mentioned this earlier as well, if a government made killing blue-eyed babies mandatory, saving one would be illegal. Now, calling that bad law is quite frankly a lot better credit than that deserves. The student who is in floods of tears studying a terrible piece of legislation the first or indeed 501st time they read it as we come towards exams, that is a bad law. To think simply of good and bad law is to lump together ineffective government and what is morally inexcusable. Now, I'm honored to be part of a debate with Mr. Brown and Professor Vernon today, because both of them have been tireless advocates for equality, working against the unlawful expulsion of countless individuals who arrived in the UK lawfully as citizens of this country. To call what they have fought against just bad law, I think is quite frankly insulting. It was, to put it bluntly, not law. The land registry doesn't deserve to be ignored. It is that which strikes at the fundamental core of what it is to be human, that strikes at the fundamental core of equality and justice. That is what deserves to be ignored. That which is not law. Yes, I'll gladly yield to that. Thank you. What I'm saying is, though a government can purport to call anything it wants a law, that does not make it a law. There are things which offend so fundamentally against the natural principles of, let me finish this question first, fundamental principles of justice that I do not consider that those are law. By that logic, anything that a government says can always be punished if it has enough force. If someone who has a large private militia can enforce something, that doesn't make it law either. Just because something is done doesn't mean that it is lawful. Yes? Well, no, I don't agree with that. I appreciate your point. However, what I'm saying is there are some things which I do not think that many of us would consider would be law. I don't think any of us in this room would say that genocide is acceptable. I don't think any of us in this room would say that slavery is acceptable. However, what I do think is it is not going to lead to any constructive debate, and it is in fact going to lead to chaos if we all individually decide, okay, theft applies, but not to me. Not at the moment. I need to get through this speech. So moving on to my final point. Understanding what law is, it remains to be said that ultimately law does have some morally binding effect on us. The legitimate government of a state, and I place emphasis on the word legitimate, government of a state, is a body to which we surrender a degree of our autonomy in return for safety and for security. A government that is not providing that is another matter. But as long as a government is legitimate, it holds an authority to make laws which we have to follow. Such laws bind us, such laws bind governments. And earlier it was the case, not right now, I'm afraid, sorry. If I get through this paragraph in time, I'll come back to you. It was mentioned earlier, the case of Miller 2, the case of the prorogation of Parliament. Now, whilst many in the government might not have liked the decision, they might not have liked to bring Parliament back, they had to. That was the law. They may have felt it was bad, but it was the law. One may say that following bad laws protects those in power, and of course, to some extent, it does. But when laws aren't followed, unfortunately, it is inevitably those who are vulnerable who also suffer. Those who are minorities suffer when people are able to use force, be discriminating. It is those who suffer from domestic abuse who suffer when we don't enforce laws. It is those who come from minorities. It is those who do not have a voice. Thank you. We cannot deny, of course, that there are bad laws, and we must protest against them. We must petition against them. And when the community and experts condemn an arbitrary or unclear criterion, it is the duty of any government to amend or repeal it, especially when it threatens our fundamental rights, perhaps those of protest, perhaps those to life. But ignoring bad law creates a slippery slope, which leaves the very people law is meant to protect the worst off. So to summarize, it's all too easy to romanticize breaking a law, to think of the protester standing against oppression. Brilliant. But we forget the scientist who decides to perform human experimentation. If we choose to ignore a law, we cannot be surprised when others do the same. No, I'm out of time, I think. The Chinese philosopher Confucius said, "Do to others as you would have done to you." So as much as we can condemn other people for breaking the law, we can't be surprised when others disregard the laws that we don't follow. And unfortunately, we can't be entirely surprised when they disobey laws that we would. One person breaking one bad law, that might not have any big bad consequences. But when lots of people go and break lots of bad laws, that is when you get chaos. I'm going to end with a quote from Robert Bolt's A Man for All Seasons. Thomas More. "What would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get after the devil?" Roper. "Yes, I'd cut down every law in England to do that." Thomas More. And when the last law was down and the devil turned round on you, where would you hide, the laws all being flat? So when you say, the law's obligations, they're important, but they shouldn't apply to me, don't expect the law's protection when the devil comes for you. Thank you.
Thank you all for another great debate. In this house, we vote with our feet. Please go through the aye door, the no door, go through the middle to abstain, and the results will be announced in the bar after.